Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 17th Coronavirus Telephone Town Hall. I'm Senator Steve Glazer. It's day 50 of our shelter-in-place here in the Bay Area. I hope everyone is coping okay. As those who have tuned into these town halls before know that I try to bring in experts who are much smarter than me to address a lot of the issues and concerns that people are having during our stay-at-home situation. You can find those previous town halls all on my website. They deal with the recent health orders, discuss unemployment insurance benefits, small business help. We did a show on the grocery store supply chain and the challenges and issues with that. We did one on pets, coping skills, and remote learning challenges, and many more, all at my website, sd07.senate.ca.gov. And as you may know, we're happy to take your questions as we go through our conversation today that I'm happy to share with our guests. Today I have with me four of the Bay Area's top journalists, and they will be discussing how this new world of COVID-19, our shelter-in-place and physical distancing requirements have affected how they covered the news. I want to welcome Julie Hayner from KTVU Channel 2. Julie, welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
We have Doug Sovereign, the wonderful political reporter for KCBS Radio. Doug, welcome.
Thanks, Steve. Really a pleasure to do this. Thanks for asking.
We have Laura Anthony, a veteran reporter. I'll give everyone a fuller introduction when we begin, but from ABC7, Laura, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
And we're hoping that Phil Matier, the great columnist from the San Francisco Chronicle, will join us. He hasn't come in at the moment, but he's got a busy schedule, and we're hoping that he will pop in before we are done with our conversations. But these reporters are on the front lines reporting on the coronavirus and the immense changes it has brought to the Bay Area, the difficult stories of pain and loss, and how we're all enduring. They also have to make their own adjustments in their personal lives, juggling work with children at home. I thought listeners would like to hear from these folks who have a particular story to tell about what they are going through in these tough times. These are the journalists that we invite into our homes and our cars every day, whether on TV, the radio, or in newspapers. So under a coin flip, I'm going to begin with Doug Sovereign. Doug, you began your career as a copy boy at the New York Times, and then you moved to California to play in a rock band. I can't wait to hear the name of your band. But you didn't make it. I don't think there's any vinyl out there in the stores that we can, or on the internet that we can acquire. Maybe you can share that with us. But you returned to journalism, worked for AP Radio and San Francisco station K101, and you joined KCBS in 1990. I'm on my calculator now. It's almost that 30 years. Oh my! You cover politics.
Yes, it's my 30th year.
Did you get a pin or anything for that?
Let's see. At 25, I got a set of luggage. I think that's right. I haven't gotten anything to 30 yet.
All right. I do know that you do occasional features and investigations. You also report for. You've done some stories for some of the other journalistic enterprises around the Bay Area. You've won 200 journalism awards, including 5 National Edward R. Murrow Awards, and you're married, and you have a couple young twins at home, which I've been enjoying your Twitter posts about the adventures with your twins. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Doug, tell us, how are you coping with life under COVID-19, professionally and personally?
It's a challenge, and I just want to say from the outset, thanks for having us on here, Steve. And yes, there is vinyl you can find. That band I came out to be in was called the Nice Boys from New York, and we did put out one album, and it's out there somewhere in the discount bin. And then I've done other albums over the years with other bands, but it's a challenge, and I don't want to. What we face is very difficult every day, but it's nothing compared to somebody who's lost their job or lost a loved one or is, stricken with this disease. So every day I count my blessings that I'm employed and healthy, and so is everyone else in my family, immediate family, although I have relatives back east who've gotten coronavirus. But, it's tough. I mean, I have 6-year-old twins. I had to build a little radio studio and work from home. Almost everyone at KCBS is working remotely now from their homes, broadcasting from there, just a skeleton crew at the station. It's a challenge to do what we do and not, come into too close contact with a lot of people. I mainly work from home now. I do interviews over the phone and by Zoom. I cover the governor's news conference every day remotely. And then meanwhile, I have my 6-year-old twins underfoot and have to educate them and deal with homeschooling, and they can be a handful, as you've seen on Twitter. Yesterday, I had a live broadcast completely collapsed because my son decided to burst into the studio and knock down all my soundproofing just as our anchor Stan Bunger threw to me. So every day is a misadventure or an adventure, but again, I'm grateful to not have gotten sick and to have a job at a time when a lot of people have, that is not the case for them.
Well, I know as parents, every moment is a teaching moment, and I'm sure you had a very dramatic teaching moment yesterday.
Yes, and in fact, my kids then made some new signs to put on my door. One says, "On the air, KCBS, don't even knock," and it's red, and then another one is green that says, "Okay to knock," and has a smiley face, and then they can come in. Because the previous signs weren't working, and they think you can just knock and open a door and barge right in. And when I'm on the radio, that's probably not the best thing to do.
Yes, although I'm sure the listeners would understand, but it still takes you out of your professional mode, and that can be distressing.
I think it was probably pretty entertaining for listeners, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Julie Hayner, you're an award-winning anchor for the 5, 6, and 10 p.m. segments on KTVU Channel 2. You started as a weekend anchor in 1998. You've won multiple awards, including 7 Emmys. And I understand you grew up in Washington, Tacoma, Washington. You're married and have a couple sons. And didn't one of your boys go to Washington, go back to your university?
He did, yeah. It's kind of a long story to go back. I was so excited. My dad went there at the University of Washington. I graduated there, and then Jake, growing up here in the East Bay, played football for Monte Vista and got a scholarship to go to University of Washington. He was there for 2 years, and then because of football, he really he was going to be a backup going into his third year. He decided to transfer, so he's now had to sit out last year, now at Fresno State. Was hoping had a really good chance to be the starter this year as the quarterback, and then all of this happened. So we don't even know if we're going to have a football season. So we're crossing our fingers and toes that he's going to get his chance to play.
Well, I'm sure you're very proud of him, especially going back to your alma mater. That's pretty cool, and it gives you a chance to go back too and stay connected to that world.
I have so many friends up there. It was really fun to be able to go back and watch him there for a couple of years and reconnect with my old friends.
So, Julie, you have a different role than Doug does as a reporter on the ground. You're anchoring in the studio, but everything's changed now under COVID-19. What are the adjustments that you have to be making?
Oh, my. Everything, like you said, has changed. There's so much to talk about for so many different people on so many different levels. I just quickly want to echo what Doug said about, I feel blessed and grateful that I am able to still work from home and work from the studio, but my heart goes out to the people who are really struggling, who have lost their jobs, who are struggling to put food on the table, who are sick in the hospital, or who have lost loved ones, or who are just afraid to go out because they're afraid to get this terrible virus. So in my world, I'm blessed because I look for the silver linings. I have my 2 boys who had just gone off to college. Jake's 21, Kyle's 19. They are now back home with us. I don't have young kids like Doug trying to rein in the young kids and then trying to work from home. So I feel lucky that I feel my heart goes out to the parents who are trying to homeschool while being, quarantined during all this and not knowing how long it's going to last. But for my role, I'm on the news 3.5 hours every evening, 5, 6, 10, and 11. We have all had to learn basically something that we've never had to do before, and that's figure out a way to do the news from home. So all of our reporters, most of us anchors, the assignment editors, the producers, the whole crews are learning to work and make this happen. I don't know how they all set it up on the technological side, but coming from our home every night, and trust me, we've had technological problems that we've had to work through last night right before the 10 o'clock news. my Wi-Fi went down again, and I literally made it in 45 seconds before the top of the show. Didn't think I was going to make it, and then I did. I got through. Just things weren't connecting right, so I was calling the tech guy at home. He's like, I don't really know what to tell you. Just keep trying, keep trying. So we're all trying to make it work, one way or another. And I think viewers are understanding, and they kind of get, they understand what we're going through, so they're a little bit more forgiving that we're in kind of uncharted territory and trying to make this all work. But so my job is 1 week I'm home, and then I alternate with Frank, and then the next week I go into the studio. And when I go into the studio, like Doug said, there's really a skeleton crew. I've been working at Channel 2 for 22 years, and I go in now, and there literally is like 3 people in the building. It's so weird to go in there and have nobody there and have this working with 3 people in the building. It's kind of amazing how it all has worked out.
Wow, that's a whole different work experience that you're going through. And I'm sure we don't appreciate the challenges that it takes to put on all these broadcasts so many times of the day. Let's bring in Laura Anthony. Laura, you're also an Emmy award-winning reporter. You joined ABC 7 in 2001. Is that right? 19 years ago.
Yep.
Do you staff a Contra Costa bureau or an East Bay bureau?
Well, yeah. We unfortunately, right before this all started, the station decided, I didn't decide, to close our Walnut Creek bureau, our office there. So while I'm still an East Bay reporter, we're kind of, a cowboy without a horse. So, yes, I work in the field, and I'm still in the field. And I can tell you a little bit more about that.
Well, I want to hear about it, but I want to just finish on your bio. You got your bachelor's and your master's in journalism from Berkeley, UC Berkeley. Is that right?
Yes.
And you're married and you have one son at home, living at home?
Still, yes. We're hoping he can go off to college, but we'll see. He's, like so many other kids his age, and like Julie's son's in limbo.
So before I ask you about your job, how is remote learning, distance learning working for him? I guess senior year, this must be a pretty happy and sad moment for him.
Right. I mean, it's sort of, it's been an interesting experience. I think I feel, and like Julie and Doug said too, I mean, what people are going through health-wise and financially and all of that really supersedes so much of what we're seeing. But my son is an 18-year-old. He's a senior at Camp Lindo. And fortunately for us, he got in a lot of colleges already for engineering. So spring semester senior year was not going to be all that important anyway, academically, although I do have to keep reminding him every day that he has 4 AP tests next week. But, he's kind of checked out in terms of the grades. In our district, they decided to go with credit, no credit. And as a parent, I kind of wish they had kept that a secret until maybe the last week of school, because I think a lot of kids have kind of checked out and have learned, what they need to do as the minimum to get, I think, 60% to pass the class. So we could spend, I'm sure you already have probably spent time with the education system and how this could maybe be done better or differently if we ever have to do this again. But, I think I fortunately cut back my schedule to part-time about a year ago, so I only work 3 days a week. Excuse me. So for me to try to balance the home and the work is a little easier, I think, than those who are working full-time. But I am still at KGO, ABC 7. We have a good number of our reporters and anchors working from home. I think like in a newscast, we'll have one anchor in the studio, one at home, that kind of thing. Our reporters, unless you're based in San Francisco, most of us are still out in the field, and we're adapting in all sorts of different ways.
So talk to me about that. Doug, I think you mentioned you're mostly working from home. You're not in the field. Julie, obviously, in the studio. So, Laura, you are in the field. What does that entail for you? And tell me, do you worry about it? I mean, is everyone doing the physical distancing when you're out there covering news?
Yeah, I think so. As we speak, I just pulled into a press conference next to the Oakland Coliseum. The city of Oakland is unveiling their plans for these trailers that they received from the state emergency operations center, and these are to try to house some of the unhoused folks during the pandemic. So the way the press conference will work, and we've been doing these throughout, is we all have masks on, including the folks who work for the city. The mayor will have a mask on. We put a microphone. We each put our own microphone stand out there, and we all step back. And the mayor in the past, excuse me, at least has pulled out. She'll pull off her mask to do the press conference, and then she'll put it right back on. Our microphones are sanitized each and every time. My photographer, Randy Davis, who's been in this business for 40 years, he's adapting. He's got sanitizers. Every time we use we use the long poles where we're interviewing people from 8 to 10 feet away. And we're making it work. And I really, we're the same people who were in the middle of paradise a year and a half ago with flames around us. So, we know how to do things in a risky environment, and we've learned how to be safe. And honestly, at this point, I mean, the story is still out in the world, and I honestly feel like, at least, our crew and the way we're doing things, I feel like we're safe, and I feel like, in order to do the kind of compelling visual storytelling that we want to do, at least some of it out in the world is okay. I mean, we don't go into buildings. We sanitize everything over and over. I'm driving my own car. We usually would normally ride together in a truck. So, like we do when we cover fires, there's a certain level of risk, but, the story is really the thing for us.
And so has anyone, it's good to hear about all the precautions that you are taking. Has anyone at ABC gotten COVID-19 in your operation?
No, unfortunately. And I think there have been some close calls with family members, spouses, and I'm sure Julie can speak to this, and Doug as well. I mean, they're purposely, we have only a certain number of people in the building, because obviously the fear is if even one person who works in the control room, for instance, where there have to be people, if one of them gets it, you're going to have to close down that whole operation and send all those people home. So in order to keep the newscast on, they have to purposely minimize the number of people at the station.
Right. And Julie, what about
somebody has to push the buttons, right? So, and
right.
That's where they are.
Julie, anybody getting the coronavirus at your station that you know of?
No, thankfully not. That's a negative. We have been exactly what Laura was saying, making contingency plans, because we all thought sooner or later the inevitable that someone would get it, and if someone did get it, we would have to shut the entire operation down, like Laura said, and quarantine everyone. But luckily, no one has gotten it at Channel 2 that I know of. I think if someone had, we would have known about it. But like she said, the building is kept to just a minimum. When we come in, people, of course, wearing their masks still. There's little paper to grab the door handle when you walk in, but heaven forbid someone get it in the control room, then like Laura said, the whole thing would have to be shut down. They were making contingency plans that if that did happen, we might have to go into a really different scenario where we would be they were making plans to set something up in the parking lot so that we would be outside the building. But that's why they went right away to keeping everybody at home to prevent, a total shutdown. Or there was even talk in the very beginning about having, if for some reason Channel 2 would be shut down, or Channel 7, or channel, different channels, that we would maybe go on a rotation, like where one station would do the news one night for the Bay Area and then another station the next night. There was talk about that, or like working out of our Fox affiliates, having possibly, if it got really bad, having like if Channel 2, the Fox affiliate in the Bay Area, was to have to shut down, maybe we'd have to go to our LA affiliate and have Fox in LA cover the news. Just making all kinds of scenarios, because we really didn't know how this was going to play out and like what would happen or how bad. And fortunately, you know, with all the shelter in place and the stay at homes, it seems like our numbers in California have really been much better than what could have been. So fortunately, keeping our fingers crossed. I'm really, for myself, want to take the antibody test. I'm really curious because my husband and I were very, very sick around Valentine's Day for like 2 weeks. Extremely, I had to stay out of work for a week. I had the chills, I had the fever, I had the headache, I had the extreme exhaustion, I had the cough, I had soreness. So I really want to take the antibody test because I think possibly I could have had it.
Yeah, it's very possible. And Doug, at KCBS, have you been able to avoid, has your station been able to avoid the virus?
Yes, so no one has tested positive that I'm aware of in our building. And remember, at KCBS, we're on one floor, which we share with Alice Radio, and then we also in the building have The Game, the sports station, 95.7. We have Alt 105, and we have Channel 5. So we have 5 different operations going on, plus some various web stuff. And as far as I know, no one has, and we too have all kinds of contingency plans. And, you know, KCBS is the emergency broadcast station for Northern California, so it's really, really vital that we stay on the air. So I actually have not been at the station for 55 days. We started doing this even before the Bay Area shelter-in-place order. We started working remotely ourselves just as a precaution. My wife is a doctor. She works at San Francisco General Hospital. And like Julie, we have a feeling we may have had it already. And actually, my wife's going to get the antibody test because she got really sick for about a week in February, and she never gets sick. And she had what seemed like the flu, but an unusually bad one with headache and fever and all the classic symptoms of COVID-19, and was never tested. This was before we didn't even think that was a possibility. But we have a feeling she had it. And I had like 1 day of mild fever, and so did one of my kids. And so we're looking forward to the antibody test too. But no one has tested positive at KCBS. And again, if someone did, they would clear out the whole building. In New York, a couple people at our CBS radio broadcast center did test positive, and they transferred that entire operation to Washington, D.C. I mean, this was weeks ago. They've been working out of Washington. They didn't want to take any chances. They basically put in place a plan they had from back when people were sending anthrax in the mail and they had to evacuate for a couple of days. They just, as a precaution, moved their entire operation to Washington and shut down the New York center. So there are all kinds of contingency plans in place. Unfortunately, we have not had to use any of them.
Doug, we heard from Laura Anthony a moment ago about how she's covering the news as if nothing has changed. I mean, in terms of being out in the field. You're trying to do it all from home. What are the challenges that you've had in being able to cover our political world in that fashion now?
Well, I have gone out a few times, but it's been about 3 weeks since I've had to. When I do go out in person, whether it's a news conference with Mayor Libby Schaaf or an interview I have to do, I'm doing what Laura described. I have a special pole that's 6 feet long. I can put my mic on the end of it. We call it a SIDMOS, social distancing man on street stick. But it's basically just a mic boom. And I wear a mask and gloves, and I sanitize the mic and keep my distance from people. But, you know, frankly, the work suffers a little bit. I mean, I like to be with people. One of the reasons I love my job is every day is different. I'm out in the field. I meet people. I go interesting places. As my old colleague Mike Sugarman always said, we have a front row seat to history and a backstage pass to life, or something like that. And that is not true right now. I'm doing it mostly at home, covering news conferences via Twitter and Facebook and Zoom, doing interviews over the phone and FaceTime. And you lose something when you're not making personal contact with someone and seeing their body language and making a human connection. And, you know, the interviews aren't as good over the phone. The quality isn't as good. And I like to use a lot of sound in my stories on the radio, and that's lacking a lot of the time now. We're doing more straightforward work, but we all understand that we just have to do what we can to get through this time and bring people the essential information. And maybe the stories, you know, won't sound quite as good, but we hope our presentation is compelling enough that people are getting all the information they need.
All three of you have such history in the journalism field. You've covered probably everything, earthquakes, fires, and you name it. Would you consider this to be the most challenging time and issue to cover, or have there been bigger ones in your journalism life? Who wants to start? Laura, you want to start with you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm thinking, you know, I was at Columbine, you know, I was at Sandy Hook, I would tell you emotionally, as a parent especially, I would say those were more difficult. In terms of fear for my life, again, I go back to Paradise because we were up there as probably a little too much in the flames there. We thought we were in a safe spot. But I think what we do as journalists is we can draw from those experiences and inform sort of what we do now and try to keep it in perspective. I think what helps for those of us who have been around a long time is that sense of perspective. And in many ways, this is obviously, I told my son actually a few weeks ago, I said, Joe, I hope this is the hardest thing you'll ever have to go through. And he looked at me and he said, Mom, it's not that hard. So on one hand, our sense of perspective, informs us in terms of the gravity of what we're dealing with here and the far-reaching implications. But in terms of its comparison to other stories, there really is no comparison. But I think one thing that as a television reporter, I'm used to being able to report on things I can see. And all I can see in terms of the threat from this is people in masks and hospital beds and obviously the images we've seen from those people who are suffering in their health. And I was outside of the nursing home in Hayward when the ambulances were rolling up and they were bringing people out. So it's a little hard to put your finger on this one in terms of, television. So I feel like it's a tremendously difficult time for everyone. And I totally get that. In terms of difficulty for me as a journalist, I felt more immediate fear, certainly in some of those other situations. And I felt emotionally, things were more difficult, standing outside of a school where, 20 first graders were killed.
I want to ask the other two the same question, but let me just mention that we have gotten some questions that have come in. I want to be sure to get the time to ask them to all of you. But Julie, how would you put this coronavirus in perspective in your career, difficulty of your life, of the issues? Where would you place it?
Well, I would just definitely say that it is a major challenge. It's uncharted territory. We've all never seen anything like this before, and it's something that is affecting people all around the world, not just here in the Bay Area, but we all can share in this and we can all feel this, and so many people are struggling on so many levels. I was just thinking back on the big stories we've covered here, certainly locally in the Bay Area. You go back to the Loma Prieta earthquake, the East Bay Hills firestorm, the terrible, devastating fires in the North Bay the past several years. There have been mass shootings in Southern California, all devastating on so many levels. But like Laura was saying, and Doug was referring to, like, as journalists, as reporters, as anchors, we get out and we make the human connection and bring it the sound and the visuals. And our job is to be able to talk to people and connect with people and bring human stories. This has been more challenging because we are limited to doing it technically over the phone with Zoom conference calls, with people being separated. It's just such a loss of connect. While we are connected socially, like through media and technological connections, we're so isolated as far as no one being able to be together. And I'm a people person. I like to be with people. I like to see the emotion on their faces. I like to see their body language, like Doug was saying. And that it conveys such a feeling when we're trying to cover the stories and how it's impacting people and what it means and how we move forward through all of this. But I think it's very challenging. We just don't know. It's kind of like the invisible enemy. Like Laura was saying, you can only see this kind of through people wearing masks, the long lines at the grocery store to get in. And we just don't know financially the economic fallout that's going to happen from this. The longer the businesses stay closed, it's going to be things that will impact generations to come. Our kids will be feeling this as far as the economic fallout. It's just been really, really devastating on so many levels. And it's the first time I've ever seen something impact the whole world. So it's huge.
Thank you, Julie. And Doug, how would you put this in perspective from your career?
Yeah, I would say they hit it right on the head. I've covered so many things where I felt a greater existential threat I mean, I almost died in the Loma Prieta earthquake because the Cypress Freeway collapsed behind me when I was on an off-ramp. I covered an earthquake in Haiti. I spent 2 weeks at Ground Zero after 9/11. So there have been many times, not to mention all the fires, et cetera, many times where I felt at greater personal risk, and they were really challenging stories to cover. The difference here, I think, is this one is so much longer than any of those. I mean, the earth isn't shaking beneath our feet, but we don't know how great the risk is. And every day we worry that we could get this virus if we, depending on how we conduct ourselves that day. And this is going on for months, and it's going to go on for months more. And just for me, on the one hand, this is easier in that we have technology now that we never dreamed of on any of those other stories. I mean, the fact that I can record a clean feed of a news conference at home and ask a question via text. I mean, whoever imagined that? So there are some technological advantages that make it less challenging. But also for me, the hardest part is I have young kids. I had kids late in life. I never had to do this while managing a family and a household and 2 little kids and their homeschooling before, so that adds a lot. And just things like my father passed away in late January, and we had one memorial service for him in New York and then had to cancel the second one, and 3 of his close friends who were at that first one have died of COVID-19. So we haven't been able to mourn and grieve the way we had planned and would hope to. So, I mean, there are a lot of personal, emotional challenges, but day to day, this is, I don't think, as hard as some of the really calamitous things we've covered in the past.
Well, thank you for sharing that perspective. So we've gotten some questions that have come in. One here from Cry, who is the editor-in-chief of the Los Medanos College Experience in Pittsburgh, writes in and says, how are you keeping yourself from being burnt out when there is so much news to keep up with and write? So balance in your life, going overboard, especially if you're working from home. Doug, do you get a chance to have balance in your life? Are you still playing music?
It's tough. I'll tell you, I play music by myself. Actually, I did a song remotely where we each, I and some other musicians each sent the tracks around, and we did it on our computers. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, it's hard. I mean, there are days when I'm really stressed out. I work very hard all day. I'm working harder than I ever did. And I have friends who aren't working at all because they can't. They're at home like, oh, I cleaned out the garage. I'm painting the attic. I was like, no special projects are getting done in my house. I haven't read a page of a book in 7 weeks. So it's hard because I work hard and my wife works hard, and then we have the kids. I am out for a walk right now while we're doing this. I have to try to get exercise when I can.
Oh, good.
So that's what I do. I multitask. I pace around the house when I'm on the phone. I never do a phone call without being in motion so I can at least get some steps in. So for me, it's kind of just managing all of that and, ordering groceries, making sure we're stocked, and I do all the cooking, and it's a lot. But we're trying. And I'll tell you one thing. Often when a story goes on for a while, you start to run out of angles, and you think, oh, boy, what are we going to talk about now? With this one, we can't keep up. I mean, there are so many stories we can't even tell. It's still just like a fire hose, and it's been, coming up on 3 months, and there's an overwhelming amount of news to cover, and it's pretty intense. And
I pronounced the name wrong. It's really Chris, my staff telling me from the Los Medanos College Experience. Second follow-up question, and maybe Julie or Laura can take it. How do you suggest students who are training to be professional journalists prepare for the real world of journalism amid a pandemic?
That is a good question. Well, just be aware and be watching, and learning and seeing how we're all adapting, and I think adaptation and adjusting to when you think you can't do something, you really can do something if you put your mind to it. That's what we've learned. When we never, as journalists, imagined to be covering the news in such a way, and we are, however pretty or however ugly it is, making it happen and trying to keep that professionalism and trying to keep the content and the quality and things that we've all worked so hard to have a certain level, the way that we are used to doing the news, and not dropping that level, but being so hands tied to kind of the situation that we're in. And learning still always as a journalist to ask good questions, and they can be in contact with, I know people like to do internships, but learning and listening and asking good questions is a key to someone who's young and wants to get into this business, and kind of know that there's hard work. As a journalist, you don't just work a 9-to-5 job. You have to work on the weekends. You have to work overnight, early morning hours, holidays. The news never stops.
Well, thank you for that, sharing that good advice, Julie. Go ahead, Laura.
Well, I was going to say, at KGO, I actually think the younger journalists, some of our newer people, who are frankly way more adept at the social media side of it, are in many ways handling this a lot better than those of us who are used to doing things in a certain way with, big TV cameras and I frankly don't like to do the Zoom stuff because to me it looks and sounds bad, and even though I'm the reporter, not the photographer, I still want everything to look and sound good. So I actually think for the younger journalists coming up, as much as they can fine-tune, whether it's at home or in whatever limited environment they have, to hone those social media skills, it's going to be tremendously valuable going forward as they're looking for jobs, because those are the people that all of our stations are going to be looking for, because that's kind of the reality in the future.
Very good. Elizabeth writes in, she says, quote, I have a general complaint about the COVID-19 coverage on the part of all newscasters. She says she writes, there are too many bad stories and not enough positive news. How about sending out more statistics about recoveries and the vast number of people who experience mild symptoms instead of constant sensationalism and pictures of dire situations in ER rooms? She says such coverage and dire predictions only result in more paranoia, stress, and fear than is necessary or healthy. What would you say to Elizabeth? Julie from the anchor desk, do you feel like it's all negative and no positive?
I know a lot of it is reality. A lot of it is like bad news, but we do try to find the inspiring. I think so many people are overwhelmed and just so over it, but we're trying to be, I think we all have to remember to be patient. But we report on the recoveries. There's been so many people who have recovered, and always try to look for a balance. But people right now, I think especially, and even me, I love to see the positive stories, the inspiring stories, because, look, we can only take so much, and there is a lot of heavy news, but there is a lot of good news. There's a lot of things that are happening that it's, we're getting there. It's just, we just have to be patient. We are making progress. Businesses, this week are starting, the lower risk businesses starting to open up. Our hospitals are not as full as we thought they were going to be. The frontline healthcare workers are doing an amazing job. But, there is progress and there is positive stuff, and I think we all need it. We're all craving inspirational, positive stories, and we look for those and try to bring those to our newscast every night.
Thank you. Mark writes in, and he says, I'm concerned that both the media's war with the president and the efforts of conservative media to prove he's worthy of being reelected slant the facts of the information that the public needs to know. And Mark finishes his note by saying, how are reporters striving to separate politics from what we need to know about the impact of the COVID virus? So your world is politics, but do you feel like the politics are tainting the news or tainting the information? How would you respond to Mark?
Well, that's certainly part of our job as journalists, and those of us who cover politics, which I do a lot, is to sift through that. And, when the president comes out and his information's incorrect, or he's just using what should be a factual briefing as a platform for his reelection, we have to point that out. We fact check. We stopped carrying the president's briefings live several weeks ago when it became clear that they really weren't worth the airtime. If he makes news, we report it, and we might air that segment, but we're not just giving him an open platform. But that's part of our job, is to challenge the politicians on what they say. Gavin Newsom has made a lot of pronouncements that haven't all turned out to happen. He'll say we got X number of masks, or we got this donation, and when we look further into it, it doesn't materialize. So it's our job, part of it, is to not just report what they tell us, but to dig into it. And is it really happening? Is it true? Put things in context, put things in perspective, and that's what we try to do. It is hard, though. This is a campaign year, and everyone, if they're in office, even if they say they're not playing politics, there often is some political cast to what they're doing, and part of our job is to detect that and let our listeners, in my case, let them know.
So I know,
Steve, we're holding you accountable.
I know, yeah. Well, this is the best part, is that you guys always ask me hard questions. I get to ask you easy questions, but it's all good. I know, Doug, you're a cyclist. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
And I don't know, Laura or Julie, what you do for exercise. Sam has written in, and so that maybe if others can take this, but Sam writes in, he's talking about masks are mandatory in Contra Costa, yet he's seeing on trails where people aren't wearing them, and he raises the issue of bikers who did not wear masks. He thinks that it's created a health issue because of, as he writes, quote, the plume of viral mist is actually 15 to 25 feet, not 6 feet, with exercise. So
I can take that if you want.
Sure, great. Doug.
Me too. I ride a bike also. I ride bike also. You go ahead, Doug. I want to hear. Well,
okay, you can build on what I say. I'll just say this:
that
yes, the masks are mandatory, but if you read all the orders for both Alameda and Contra Costa County, they're not mandatory when you're out exercising, as long as you can stay at least 6 feet away. So, for example, when I go out for a run or a hike or a bike ride, I do not wear a mask. I carry one in case for some reason I get too close to someone else who feels uncomfortable. But I carry it with me and I keep my distance. But I don't wear a mask. I don't find that comfortable. If I go in a store or something like that, then obviously I put it on. And I have N95 masks left over from the wildfires that my wife had brought home from the hospital. But as far as biking, most bikers are not wearing masks. I think they are, for the most part, staying socially distant, although I was out riding in Contra Costa last weekend and saw some people starting to have little group rides where I felt they were not being safe. But that bit about the plume, yes, there's been some studies that show that if someone sneezes, for example, the plume can go 20 to 24 feet, but that doesn't mean the particles of the virus in that plume are viable. That's just a distance measurement, and if you look further at those studies, they don't suggest that that's unsafe. And there are aerodynamics involved as far as airflow around people's bodies. I mean, I've been told reliably by two really highly esteemed epidemiologists here locally that just walking by someone, even if you walked by in close proximity and neither of you was wearing a mask, the risk is almost nil unless they sneeze or cough right in your face as they pass.
Very
you
good.
Need sustained exposure of multiple minutes.
Very good. Laura, anything you want to add to that? I didn't know you were a cyclist, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I actually, my miles are way up now during the pandemic. I think many of us are getting more exercise than we ever have in our lives. But I will say, Doug, just to add on, I used to ride a little bit more on some of the East Bay Regional Park's paved trails. I live in Lafayette, and I've decided and tried to really stay off of those while I'm riding my bike, because it is difficult to, maneuver among and through people. And I've really tried to stay off on the roads. The other thing is when I am on those paths, so I have something around my neck usually, and I'll pull it up. But I have seen plenty of people who are not doing that, and I would echo your sentiment that the order does not require a mask outside if you're not within 6 feet and you're exercising.
Well, Sam, as I see, is a doctor, and he just wants to emphasize how important it is to have all the correct social courtesies when you're outdoors, outdoor etiquette, to make sure that everyone stays safe. Very good with that. So Carl writes in with a very serious question, and it's one I've actually raised with the governor's people even yesterday. He says, we could use more specific information about exactly how and where people are catching the virus, especially now given the social distancing measures in place. This can help us understand high and low risk activities, including situations to be extra careful. He says, can the journalists help here, including telling us if government agencies might have more information that isn't being shared? So there's been some, and let me enhance Carl's question, there's been information about who is being infected on demographic terms, but not where, and that why aren't we collecting that information? Because it would indicate where the gaps are in our existing shelter in place. There are still thousands of people who are getting infected every day. Hospitalizations are at a plateau, but they're still high, and we still don't really know who is it. Frontline healthcare workers? Is it essential folks in the grocery chain? Is it people who are living with someone who has it? Is it from nursing homes? Any insight, Doug, that you've gotten from the governor's office and your coverage on that?
Well, that underscores the importance of contact tracing, but, that's a really difficult one to answer because you almost never know exactly where someone got it. You can say who, you can guess, you can narrow it down, but that's why they want to trace people's contacts and alert everyone they come in contact with if somebody has it. But how can you know for sure if you got it from a grocery store or a doorknob or someone passing you on the street? It's very, very difficult without doing like detailed genetic analysis of the virus particles you have to trace it back to its source. I have two nephews and a niece who have it. One lives in Hermosa Beach, the others live back east. And my niece is pregnant and thought she got it from the ultrasound place because that's the only place she had been during her pregnancy. But everyone there is negative, and they can't find any trace of it there. And now it turns out everyone in her apartment building has it. So she now thinks the source must have been someone in her building somehow. But it's really hard to know where you get it. So I'm not sure how the government would be able to really track that back for every case. I will say there's not as much transparency as I would like. The state has its own coronavirus model, and unlike some of the other models, it's not on a website, it's not publicly available. They have been somewhat opaque in providing us that information, but even that I don't think has the kind of detailed information the questioner is asking for.
Very good. And here's a question that, Julie, maybe you can take. It's from Eileen. She says, with so many topics to cover, how are they chosen for each broadcast? Is a different priority used each day or each broadcast? Julie, from the anchor desk, what do you see about the choices that are made each day?
Well, the choices that we're trying to do daily, of course, is update the numbers and talk about the Bay Area and update nationally and then give some glimpse of what's happening around the world. But, giving the California numbers, what we're seeing, what we know as far as hospital, just the rates, the daily numbers, and then looking for, like, one of our viewers wants the positive stories. But just, I'm trying to think the best way to answer that. It's just that there's so many different stories coming in on different, if there's nursing homes or if there's elder care facilities, we know what to look for now in terms of going back to that last question a little bit about how to protect ourselves, just wearing the masks and hygiene and staying, 6 feet. The social distancing is so important. But I'm not answering this question very well. I'm just trying to think, just the daily numbers and just covering the briefings that are going on and looking for, people are sending us ideas about what's happening in their community as far as, positive things that are being thankful for the frontline workers who are helping us. I'm trying to think what else. Laura might be able to add to that too, is how her stories are assigned to her on a daily basis.
Laura, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do actually, because I know in our shop we have a morning editorial call every morning, and a lot of our stories are coming from, what we call pitches, which are and I'm sure you guys do the same things, where you have your reporters all contributing, say, 2 or 3 ideas for the day. I can do this, I can do that, what about this? And these are stories that are coming to us through, some of them are through contacts, some of them are us digging around. Looking at Nextdoor, for instance, is pretty helpful a lot of times right now, because people are doing some innovative and fun things that are more along the positive lines. So those become the story pitches for the day, and then from that bucket of stories, if you will, our producers and executives and management people are making decisions, and those become the stories for the day. So if they don't take my second story I pitched, we might do that on Thursday. So, it's that kind of a thing.
Well, as we come to a close here on this conversation, and thank you all for giving so much of your time to share your thoughts. Let me ask you each a question that's been on my mind, at least, is that when we're celebrating New Year's 2021, and we look back, what does your crystal ball say about what you think life is going to be like throughout the course of 2020, not just of what we've experienced thus far, but as we head into the summer and the fall? What does your crystal ball look like looking backwards at that point in time? Laura, I know you're about to get to a press conference, so why don't I start with you first?
Ray, I just actually walked right by Libby's shop, and we talked from 20 feet away. My hope is that we're all healthy and happy. I would say life is going to be different, and I think what we're going to see in the new year, 2021, is reflective of the lessons we've learned and the things we've had to do to adjust to this pandemic, and whatever normal looks like going forward, it's forever going to be changed by what we're experiencing right now.
And Julie, you're such an optimistic person, so it's hard for me to ask you optimism or pessimism as we finish the second half of 2020. But does your crystal ball tell you anything of insight?
Well, I really hope that we have this more behind us. I hope we have a vaccine. I hope we have treatments. I know our scientists are learning more and more every day, and that people can be healthy, and that we can look back and say, gosh, we all went through something extremely hard, but we went through it together. We've learned, and that we're better for it. And I really hope our economy starts to, once we get through and the treatments are there and the vaccine are there, that people can go back to living more of a normal life. I hope we don't have to stay so isolated as people, and that we can get together and be around people and not have the fear to be able to go out, and that people who are struggling, who have lost jobs, can go back to work, and America can get going again.
And Doug, you cover politics. It's a cynical profession. Do you have optimism as you look ahead for the second half of the year? Pessimism based on your knowledge of the virus and health and other issues? What's your crystal ball say?
Well, I'm a naturally optimistic person with a sunny disposition, so that helps in a cynical world like politics. But boy, I hope for the best. I hope that on New Year's Eve we are clinking our glasses in person and not doing it over Zoom. I don't see why we won't be, but I think a lot of this will hinge on the development of a vaccine, treatment and vaccine, but specifically a vaccine, so that this becomes a more manageable seasonal thing like the flu. And thousands of people die of the flu every winter, but something that will let us go back to some semblance of a normal life. It's hard for me to see my kids grow up like this. They think this is normal. They had wildfires and smoke days at school, and now this. I mean, they think there's just some huge crisis every year, and this is how life is. I'd love to have a period without any drama, so might not be so good for our ratings, but it would be better for our lives. So I'm hoping that we do come back to some sort of normal by the winter, but this may become part of the everyday fabric of our lives for a while, as far as seeing people wearing masks and having some people still want to be socially distant, especially if they're part of a vulnerable population.
Well, Doug Sovereign from KCBS and Julie Hayner from KTVU and Laura Anthony from ABC7, you've been very kind to be a part of this conversation today. I know what gives me optimism is to know that we have such experienced journalists digging into all these issues that we're facing with objectivity and with hard work and tenacity that you all bring to your profession. And so I'm very grateful that you're enduring in personal and professional ways in what we're going through, as so many others are, and that you continue to give us a great reporting and insight in the days and weeks ahead. So I'm very, very grateful for you taking the time to share with me and for our listeners all your experiences and insights. So thank you very much.
Well, Senator Glazer, thanks so much for having us. Yes, we appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks for the words of support for our profession.
You bet.
Yes. And everyone take care and stay well.
Yeah,
exactly.
Indeed.
Stay safe, everybody.
So that concludes our conversation with these wonderful journalists. There is a recording of it on my website that you can have access to, and all the town halls that we have done thus far are available on the website. That's st07.senate.ca.gov. We have links to the latest information from the Center for Disease Control, the State of California, the County Public Health Departments, the Office of Education, and much more to help you with facts to get through the difficult circumstances that we're facing. And I know how difficult they are for everyone who has a child at home, who is trying to keep a job, who has lost a job, who is facing illness themselves or someone close to you. These are seemingly the most difficult of times in our lives. But I have optimism that we are turning the corner, that our physical distancing is working, the shelter in place is working. We have to keep it going, though. The governor's indicated that they're going to loosen some of the provisions there, which we're all positive about, but we have to continue to manage it, or else we're going to get back to our current situation or even worse. We do these town halls to try to bring you accurate, reliable, up-to-the-minute information. We have more planned ahead. Please share any thoughts or suggestions and writing your notes to me. Always appreciated. And again, I want to thank you for listening and wish you all a very good day.